My wife and I had what I considered to be an ideal relationship. We were close friends and seemed to benefit each other in numerous ways. We grew up together and dated for our last 2 years of high school, all the way through college. Physically, we were each other's first partners. In terms of sexual activity, we attended the same university, though in different fields of study. We married 2 years after graduation. We then relocated to a major city near our hometown to be near our families. I secured employment as an engineer, earning a competitive salary with benefits. My wife obtained a position teaching at we attended a prestigious private school together, where she excelled. We were both gainfully employed and enjoyed a comfortable income, which afforded us the opportunity to spend considerable time together. We engaged in various leisure activities, including travel and dining out. Even in social settings, we were often seen together. Our relationship was characterized by a profound sense of joy and contentment. Our expressions of affection were so exuberant that they could have served as the inspiration for a collection of love-themed frames. Our sexual intimacy was fulfilling and frequent, with an average of 4 or more encounters per week. I had previously considered our life together to be exemplary. However, I have since come to recognize that this assessment was erroneous. We had planned to attempt to conceive a child in the near future, a development that initially took me by surprise. I found myself unable to stop crying on Easter morning at the break of dawn. We had been scheduled to assist at our church in hiding Easter eggs on the property for children to find later. We arose and dressed without showering before driving to the church together. We assisted in hiding eggs that were clearly visible. For the younger children, there were more discreet eggs. Later that day, my wife took numerous photographs on her mobile phone of us, as well as many members of the congregation. We all proceeded to have coffee and donuts while conversing before heading home. I drove to the church, but I convinced my wife to drive us home. She commented that she was going back to bed for a few hours. When we returned, I wanted to preview the college basketball championship game the next night because my father was a Bayer graduate. We brought my wife's iPad, which I used frequently, as though it were my own. I did not anticipate seeing anything on the device. I am not particularly knowledgeable about technology, so I am unsure of the precise details of what occurred. However, as we were entering the house, an icon appeared in the lower right corner of the screen. It displayed the word "Photos," and then 2 images, one above the other, appeared. It is unclear whether my wife's phone was transferring data to the iPad or if our Wi-Fi was the source of the transfer. Upon observing the images, I discerned that they were the same photographs my wife had just captured outside the church. I proceeded to peruse the images further. Suddenly, a series of images, which appeared to contain nudity, flashed on the screen. This was highly unusual for my wife, as she does not engage in such activities. I attempted to tap on the images to navigate back, but found that the photos were not accessible on the iPad. Each image appeared for a brief moment before disappearing. I then opened the photo file on the iPad, but could not locate any images that could be considered pornographic. It became evident that none of the images captured at the church were stored on the iPad. The images of the church were present on the iPad, yet I had observed them briefly. My wife proceeded to the kitchen and retrieved a bottle of water, subsequently returning to bed. I observed her ascend the stairs and, for the first time in the history of our relationship, I experienced a sense of unease, as though she might be concealing something from me. I proceeded to search the iPad for any files that might provide insight into what I had seen. However, I eventually recognized that to alleviate my concerns, would have to examine my wife's phone. I made my way upstairs and found her sleeping peacefully in our bed. I removed her phone from the charger and took it into the bathroom. We had never established a policy regarding the use of our respective devices, we simply accessed each other's phones at will, with no expectation of privacy. Therefore, discovering that my wife had changed her passcode was a significant source of distress. I attempted to guess her passcode using a variety of methods, but it was evident that it had been altered. I was overwhelmed with emotion, recognizing that my wife was likely concealing something from me. This incident served as a clear indication that there were certain facts about our lives that I was not aware of and that I felt compelled to discover. I returned to the bedroom and I returned her phone to the charger. Part of me wanted to believe that I was experiencing a psychological phenomenon, that I was imagining what I had seen. My mind was playing tricks on me. I had actually imagined discovering what I saw was nothing carnal and laughing about what I thought it actually was. However, the passcode had given me away. I tried to act as normally as possible. She knew me better than anyone, so it was difficult to maintain a facade while simultaneously being deceitful. However, late that afternoon, when she was in the kitchen, I heard her text. I promptly moved to investigate further, observing her input a brand new code. This confirmed my initial suspicion that I was not losing my mind. Later that night, after she had retired for the evening, I again took her phone into the bathroom. I entered the new code and accessed her photos file, only to find no images of an explicit nature. Even the photographs she had taken at the church that morning were free of any pornographic content. I was just about to close the app when I decided to search for any deleted photos. I was astonished to discover 2 images of my wife in a state of undress, accompanied by a photograph of a male individual who was not myself. I promptly transmitted all 3 images to my personal device and then deleted the text message and the images. I placed my wife's device back in its holster, proceeded to the downstairs restroom to minimize noise, and then deleted the images. I had never previously observed either image of my wife engaging in such activities. They were not her typical conduct, and I did not particularly desire such images. I could always have her to myself at a future date, should the opportunity arise. I was already aware of how to proceed. My wife was naked in the photographs. We considered that images of this nature could potentially cause significant distress and embarrassment to the individuals depicted. We were a closely bonded couple and did not perceive a need to share our intimate moments with the wider world. However, I was unable to identify the man in the photograph. Upon viewing it, I experienced a sense of anger, despite having no knowledge of the man's identity or whether my wife was acquainted with him. After regaining my composure, I sought solace on the floor, weeping inconsolably. This was the most intense emotional outburst I had ever experienced. I intuitively sensed that something was amiss. I obtained several hours of sleep in the proximity of my wife before my obligation to attend work. I suspended all ongoing projects and conducted research on the retrieval of text messages from a mobile phone. It transpired that, due to the fact that the plan was in my name through my employer, I was able to access every message and image sent via text. In summary, I recovered a series of messages, selfies, and even images and videos in which my wife and I were engaged in sexual activity. I subsequently vomited, but the vomit was not profuse. I had already expelled the last of the vomit at 2 a.m. On Monday morning, I awoke at 6 a.m. I proceeded to my vehicle and experienced a profound emotional distress, to the extent that I believed my eyes might bleed. I was unable to comprehend that the traumatic situation I was facing was, in fact, a reality. I was immediately aware that my relationship with my wife, whom I considered my closest friend, had irreversibly deteriorated, and that my aspirations had been irrevocably lost. I vocalized my intense feelings of anger and frustration in a manner that could be described as primal screams. I was grateful that she was not present during this pivotal moment of realization. I was uncertain of my own capabilities and did not wish for her to witness my emotional state. I was unsure of how to proceed or where to go. I considered contacting various individuals, but I was still in a state of shock. The person who had caused me the greatest harm was the very person I would have turned to in such a situation. I ceased crying and sat in a state of disbelief, unsure of what to do but certain that I did not want to take any action. I recognized that what had begun as an unproductive morning would likely result in an unproductive day. I returned to the office and met with each team member. Regarding the company project, I was unable to continue working and left the premises. I was so distressed that I was unable to interact with my wife, and I was not inclined to confront her at her educational institution. Instead, I drove aimlessly for several hours, experiencing a range of intense emotions. I oscillated between tears and rage. The evidence I had uncovered was overwhelming and irrefutable. I considered sending an email to both our families, including all the information I had gathered, and then driving my car off a bridge. However, I did not act on this impulse. I was determined to continue living and was reluctant to engage in a confrontation that would ultimately result in the dissolution of my marriage. My wife typically returned home a few hours after I did, so I parked my vehicle down the street from her school to ascertain her whereabouts upon leaving work. Based on the evidence I had gathered, I anticipated that she would likely proceed to her lover's residence for an impromptu encounter after work. However, she departed and headed directly home. I was unaware of her whereabouts as I followed her home. I had printed out numerous texts and images from her phone at work to present to her and demonstrate the extent of my knowledge. I anticipated a denial of any wrongdoing on her part until I produced the evidence, which would result in a lengthy discussion and conflict. I was not prepared for this and did not want to see her again, speak with her, or be in her presence. In particular, I was distressed by the images in question. In a matter of hours, my feelings towards her underwent a radical transformation. I went from loving her more than I had ever imagined possible to hating her with every fiber of my being. The way she had treated me was utterly bewildering. My mind was in a state of disarray. I was consumed with the urge to flee the house without seeing her or saying a word, if possible. When I walked in the front door, she was seated on the couch engaged in text messaging. It was possible that she was communicating with her mother or sister, or perhaps with anyone else. However, I was certain that she was not texting me. On that day, I had learned that the probability of her texting me was high. She was occupied with activities that could potentially cause me further distress. She smiled and observed that I had returned from work earlier than usual. I did not respond to her greeting. Instead, I proceeded down the hallway to our bedroom and retrieved a suitcase from the closet. I began packing clothes. During the workweek, while I was staying in a hotel room, she entered the bedroom and observed me packing. She inquired if I had to go on a sudden business trip. I ceased my activities, gazed at her with an expression of intense disdain, and then resumed packing. She approached me and asked what was wrong. She placed her hand on my back, and I recoiled from her touch, as if she had just touched a dead animal carcass filled with maggots. I turned and loudly demanded that she never touch me again before pushing her away. When she attempted to inquire about the problem, I called her a disease. She was deserving of a severe burning sensation to be applied to her genitals to prevent her from engaging in procreation. She had the audacity to appear shocked and hurt. At that moment, I retrieved the stack of documents I had copied and threw them onto the bed, closed my suitcase, and began to leave. She sat down to examine the documents before I reached the end of the hallway. I heard her scream, "No," before she began to weep. She began to sob and attempted to catch up with me. I managed to exit the building and get into my vehicle, placing my suitcase in the back. She was able to follow me outside, but I had already started driving away. My phone began to ring incessantly, much like a casino slot machine, so I simply turned it off. My intention was to completely disengage from her and allow the necessary steps for divorce to be taken. I was advised by my lawyer to refrain from inquiring about the circumstances of the relationship, including how it began, the nature of the infidelity, and the specific events that transpired between the two parties. My understanding was that infidelity was a significant factor in the dissolution of the marriage, yet I was uncertain about the rationale behind her continued communication. I secured a motel room approximately 1 mile from my workplace and proceeded to consume a meal at an adjacent restaurant. In the motel room, I utilized the motel telephone to contact my mother and inform her of my whereabouts. She had been among the initial individuals my wife had contacted following my departure. I inquired of my mother whether she had been apprised of the reason for my departure. She acknowledged that she had not been informed. I proceeded to convey the circumstances that had transpired, disclosing that we would be proceeding with a divorce and that I would be seeking employment in a different state to avoid any future encounters with my soon-to-be former spouse. I requested that my wife refrain from contacting me or any of her family members. I implored her to keep our conversation and the subsequent events between herself, my father, and my siblings. My mother wept. I was not present to witness the scene, but the anguished sobbing indicated a profound sense of disbelief and despair. The realization that my wife and her family would no longer be a part of our lives was profoundly painful. The pain of never holding a grandchild fathered by me was also significant, but she was aware of my upbringing and therefore knew that I had reached my limit. After the call with my mother, I was exhausted and attempted to sleep, only to be awakened by a knock at the door at approximately midnight. I arose and looked outside to see my soon-to-be former spouse. My wife was awaiting my response at the door. I was unable to comprehend how she had located me, let alone determine which room I was in. However, I was reluctant to see her or hear her voice, given her actions towards me. She had forfeited any right to even acknowledge me, so I once again utilized the motel phone. I remained on the line, elucidating the circumstances to the officers who had arrived on the scene. I observed as the police removed my soon-to-be ex-wife. The police officer then proceeded to escort my wife from the vicinity of the door and direct her towards the squad car. I then permitted one of the officers to enter the room. He reassured me that my wife would not be permitted to enter and inquired as to my desired course of action. I informed him that I wished for her to refrain from contacting me and that I did not want any further communication between us. He and I then proceeded to complete the necessary documentation for a restraining order. He ensured that the terms of the order aligned with my wishes, as it would restrict my ability to interact with my wife. I informed the officer that I wished to return to my residence unescorted to retrieve my belongings. I stated that I had no desire to enter the house again and that I was through with my wife. I was prepared to relinquish the house and our shared belongings. The officer obtained my wife's signature on the restraining order. I observed her and the police officers depart, then returned to bed for several hours. I was able to reach my workplace the following day. Colleagues inquired about my well-being, presuming that I had left due to illness. I informed them that I was still feeling somewhat unwell and I informed them that I would be working in my office all day, in case my condition was contagious. I contacted my superior and requested an appropriate time to meet in my office. 15 minutes later, he was seated across from me. I believe he was there to obtain an update on the project my team was working on. When I informed him the previous day that I had discovered my wife was unfaithful, he seemed almost as shocked as I was. I did not begin to mention that I would soon be seeking employment in another state, but I did convey that information. It was evident that reconciliation was no longer a possibility. I was resolved in my decision that my wife was no longer a part of my life. I was struggling to maintain composure and prevent myself from crying. I informed my superior that I intended to immerse myself in my work as a means of distraction from my personal circumstances. I conveyed that I required the work itself, rather than the financial compensation, to a greater extent. He reassured me that I could work as much as I desired and even utilize my office as a place of rest when necessary. I expressed gratitude for his understanding before requesting his permission to do so. I requested that he maintain confidentiality regarding the matter until such time as it became public knowledge. On the day in question, I proceeded to my parents' residence for the evening meal. As the repast was drawing to a close, my parents summoned me to a private conversation. They advised me to disseminate the information to the assembled company. I commenced my account, but the news caused a certain degree of shock and indignation among the remaining diners. My siblings, in particular, expressed feelings of disquiet and anger. 2 of them had received communications from my former partner during my absence, and they had experienced a sense of compassion. For her, both wished they had been informed of the situation so they could have expressed their displeasure. I informed them and the rest of my family that my intention was to avoid contact with my wife and anyone related to her. I explained that the fault did not lie with my wife's family, rather, my wife had demonstrated that she was undeserving of any positive or negative attention. I then explained that I would be seeking employment in another state. In the following weeks, some family members expressed displeasure at my decision to remove myself from their lives. They were upset not because I was angry at my wife for her actions, but because they felt I was being punished by being removed from those who loved and cared about me. They did not believe it was fair that I was forced to leave the state. However, it was unlikely that I would be able to persuade everyone related to her to leave the state out of shame. I met with my lawyer for the first time that day. We discussed the legal implications of my decision to leave the state. Infidelity was a welcome sight to her. I attempted to approach that meeting with complete logical reasoning and no emotional involvement. All emotions are transient, and allowing one's emotions to guide one's actions is a recipe for utter chaos. I informed her and her staff that they would need to serve as intermediaries for my wife and me until the divorce was finalized. I also explained that a restraining order was in place. I told her that I was indifferent about our possessions, everything we owned reminded me of my soon-to-be ex-spouse. My wife, therefore, I was not concerned with the ownership of any material items, nor the house in which we resided. My sole concern was that she could not access my $400,000 or other investments that had been made available to me prior to our marriage. At this juncture, my lawyer inquired as to whether I desired a divorce that was both equitable and equal, or one that was conducted in a scorching manner. I gazed downwards and reflected for a few moments, realizing that the emotional turbulence I was experiencing had reached a point where it was causing me physical discomfort. I was acutely aware of the events I was living through. The events that had transpired had irrevocably altered the course of my life, rendering a reversal of the situation implausible. Prior to this, I would have selected the more lenient option had I been presented with the choice. However, the woman who had lied to me for nearly my entire life and betrayed me in a manner that no other had, evoked nothing but loathing and disgust in me. I had instructed my lawyer to pursue every avenue available to make the divorce as painful as possible. After the divorce was finalized, I envisioned a bonfire so large and bright it could be seen from space. I wanted my wife to be financially responsible for the dissolution of the marriage. If the identity of the affair partner could be determined, I wanted him to be held accountable as well. My state has alienation of affection laws, which allow a person to sue someone who contributed to the end of a marriage in civil court. I informed my lawyer that if he was in a relationship, I wanted them to contact his partner. In short, I wanted to make his life as difficult as possible. I conveyed to both of them that I held my wife in the utmost contempt and was seeking retribution. I expressed my desire to inflict as much suffering as she had caused me upon her. I wanted to obliterate her life, as she had done to mine, and allow the consequences to unfold. My lawyer contacted me at work today to inform me that my wife had been served at her place of employment. She inquired I was summoned to the office after work to converse with the individual dispatched to deliver my wife's documents. I was already aware that she had been served and was aware that I would never be involved in her life again. However, I decided to listen to the messenger in the hope that he might inform me of my wife's whereabouts. After being served, the wife committed suicide. The husband and I met with the messenger in an office without the presence of the lawyer. The husband explained that he had taken the paperwork from the school at approximately 10 o'clock. The time was 12 a.m. He proceeded to the front office to inquire about the whereabouts of the courier, who had been dispatched to deliver official divorce papers to my wife. The courier informed him that he had arrived at the classroom where my wife was teaching a lesson. The courier explained that he had walked past the staff member who was accompanying him and requested that my wife verify her identity. He then informed her that she had been served with the papers, which were intended to formally terminate our marriage due to infidelity. The courier stated that my soon-to-be ex-wife appeared shocked by the swiftness of the proceedings and was visibly embarrassed. He informed me that he had been served at work, in front of her students, and that he was fighting back tears. As he walked out, he told me that she had fallen to the floor and begun sobbing uncontrollably. I was pleased to hear this, as I was glad that she had received the paperwork. I am unsure why I am writing this out. It has been somewhat cathartic, but I do not require advice. However, I am open to receiving advice if it would be helpful. I have planned out every detail of my future and initiated the divorce proceedings. However, I am experiencing significant distress and struggling to identify a rationale for persevering. I am not contemplating suicide. I do not wish to die. I desire to regain control of my life, yet this is unattainable. It is not possible for me to embark on a new life with another partner, as my former spouse has irreparably damaged the purity and beauty of our relationship. Despite her tears, she did not care. She took what we had and destroyed it with her infidelity. I am struggling to envision my life as a single person until I die. I do not want to go on. I hate myself for ever giving her a minute of my time, much less years of my life. I feel like my entire life has been and will be a wasted life. I am sure that despite having a career and the capacity to move on, I am overwhelmed by the prospect of doing so alone for the rest of my days. I believe it is necessary to explain why I previously stated that I would never be a father and would be alone from here on out. However, I was raised in a certain way with a certain mindset, and my wife was raised this way as well. This is one of the reasons we were so close. Ultimately, she did not care about this. Her proper upbringing led to the destruction of both of us. I was raised to believe that humans were never meant to engage in frivolous activities such as harvesting oats and engaging in meaningless sexual intercourse with individuals they have just met. I believe that the most ideal relationship a human can achieve in this life is one where the two individuals have only known each other. I understand that in these modern times, this point of view may be perceived as archaic. For the majority of individuals, the discovery of intimacy between two people is a positive experience. There is no concern about previous partners, diseases, or pregnancy. There is also no concern about whether one is performing as well as a previous partner. The couple has the opportunity to learn and grow together. Our modern world has provided ways to navigate these concerns. To rectify these missteps, individuals may choose to unite in a relationship, thereby insulating themselves from the potential consequences of their predecessors' actions. This is a concept that I was previously led to believe was the optimal structure for a romantic relationship. However, it seems that humanity has deviated from this mindset. My wife, for instance, frequently espoused this belief, and I could not begin to quantify the number of times she did so. My wife asserted that she was grateful for the manner in which we had lived our lives. She stated that she held a deep appreciation for the opportunity to know each other in a way that is increasingly rare in modern society. However, it is evident that these claims were not entirely truthful. Nevertheless, the fact that she was unfaithful to me has rendered reconciliation impossible. Furthermore, I am unable to view her as attractive in light of her infidelity. Despite the use of 0.00 gallons of bleach and a pressure washer, the infidelity and subsequent filth that my wife subjected me to could not be removed. As a result, I now view her as defiled, diseased, and dirty. Previously, I could simply think about my wife and become aroused. However, now she could lay before me naked and ready, and my reaction would be to spit on her in disgust before vomiting again. As a result of my knowledge of another individual, I can never form a bond with another. It is not feasible for me to pursue a romantic relationship with a woman who is a virgin, even if I were inclined to do so. My commitment to my wife precludes me from being the kind of partner a virgin would desire. I anticipate that some readers who espouse progressive views on sexuality may express disapproval. These individuals may regard sexual intercourse as a casual act between strangers and list it as a hobby on their Facebook profiles. While I respect their opinions, I recognize that they are not universally held. My perspective on this matter is not conventional, but it is informed by my personal experience and beliefs. One man and one woman is the traditional and historically normative configuration for a marital relationship. My wife, however, proved to be a promiscuous and unfaithful partner, which ultimately resulted in the dissolution of our marriage. I recognize that I was responsible for this outcome due to my poor choice in selecting a spouse. I believe it is unjust that I did not commit the sin of adultery, yet I am now forced to endure the consequences of this decision alone. Update: I had been effectively compartmentalizing my personal life by focusing exclusively on work. In recent days, I had made significant headway on the company project, devoting all my time to work in my office. It seemed an inefficient use of resources to pay for a motel room when my office provided a comfortable couch. This morning, I intended to further advance the project and initiate my job search in other states. However, upon sitting in my desk chair and viewing the date on my computer, I was struck by a realization. A realization that evoked a profound emotional response, resulting in tears. Now that this date has passed, it is my wife's birthday. I had not planned to send her any messages of celebration, but it prompted me to reflect on the significance of this date in my life. It became clear that this date will always be associated with her, at least in my mind. The approaching holidays also evoked memories of happier times when I was in a relationship. I realized that I could no longer ignore these days and simply focus on work. The date will forever be associated with her memory, regardless of my actions or where I go. I cannot escape the reality of her presence in my life, as she was a significant figure in my life. I am seeking to erase all memories of her from my mind and to forget her ever existed. The memories I once held dear have now become bitter reminders of lies and deceit. I am unable to cope with this change. It is remarkable how swiftly circumstances can alter and devastate one's existence. Evidently, the responses to my initial post indicate that many individuals hold negative sentiments towards me, my perspectives, and my beliefs. I am at peace with this reality. In fact, I am not typically inclined to utilize the language and terminology I employed in my initial post. I simply felt that her actions conveyed a depth of disapproval that was more profound than any verbal expression I could have directed towards my wife. However, when things, as with all things in life, this situation will eventually come to an end. I could seek out professional assistance to try and convince myself that this experience has not been as traumatic as it initially seemed. However, my grandfather taught me not to mislead others, particularly those close to me. Therefore, I have made the decision to move on from this situation. This outcome is not what I had envisioned, but life can be unfair. I wish you all well and hope that you find peace in this life.